Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into Dr. Ted Hildebrandt's absolutely fascinating breakdown of the Book of Acts. We're going to treat this ancient text almost like a forensic cold case, sifting through the evidence, uncovering hidden clues, and really digging into the historical context to bring this centuries-old manuscript to life.
Here is our agenda for today's investigation. We're going to cover the hidden author, ancient fake news, dating by silence, history versus command, and wrap up with the road to Pentecost. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The Hidden Author.
So we're kicking off our investigation by zooming in on this tiny, blink-and-you-miss-it grammatical shift. In a lot of Acts, the author writes in the third person, right? He'll say things like, they traveled, or they did this. But then, out of nowhere, the text just shifts into the first person. We got ready, or we did this. Scholars call these the we passages, and they are brilliant. They act like a precise GPS tracking device, showing us exactly when the author, Luke, physically joined up with the Apostle Paul.
By following these we passages, we can literally map out Luke's exact movements right alongside Paul. We see Luke join Paul at Troas during the second missionary journey. Then he stays behind in Philippi, only to link back up on the third journey all the way down to Jerusalem. He's even right there during that crazy 2-week shipwreck on the Isle of Malta in chapter 27, which, by the way, is widely considered one of the best ancient descriptions of sea voyaging we have. And Luke stays by Paul's side all the way to Rome. Paul actually confirms this himself from a cold Roman prison cell in 2 Timothy chapter 4, where he writes, "Only Luke is with me."
But you've got to wonder, who was Luke actually compiling all this evidence for? Well, the text is addressed to someone named Most Excellent Theophilus. Now, while that name translates to lover of God, that specific title, Most Excellent, strongly hints that this was a real, high-ranking Roman dignitary. Dr. Hildebrandt proposes this fascinating idea that Acts is essentially an incredibly meticulous legal brief. I mean, think about it. It contains 20 direct first-person speeches, 9 from Peter, 9 from Paul. Luke is handing Theophilus an airtight, eyewitness-level defense brief to help clear Paul at his upcoming trial before Caesar.
Moving on to Part 2. Ancient Fake News. To understand why Paul even needed such a massive legal defense, we need to rewind a bit to the early days of the church. Initially, the Roman government just saw Christianity as a protected sect of Judaism. No big deal. But once it branched off into its own distinct religion, local Roman dignitaries started viciously persecuting Christians. And it was all based on ancient fake news. Get this, they were labeled atheists simply because they prayed to an invisible God instead of tangible stone statues. They were called incestuous just because they called each other brother and sister in their community. And the wildest one, they were labeled cannibals because rumors had spread about their communion meetings where they supposedly, ate Christ's body and drank his blood.
So the crucial takeaway here is that Acts functions as a massive apologetic, a reasoned defense. As you read through it, you start to realize Luke is systematically proving to these Roman officials that all those terrible rumors were complete garbage. He's making the case that Christians weren't violent rioters, they weren't cannibals, and they certainly weren't a political threat to the mighty Roman Empire. In fact, he shows that the chaos following Paul around was usually just stirred up by jealous opponents.
All right, Part 3. Dating by silence.
Now we're going to pan out to look at some massive world events and play a little Sherlock Holmes. According to the brilliant New Testament scholar F.F. Bruce, we can figure out exactly when this document was written, not by looking at what's in the text, but by looking at what isn't. The absolute most fascinating clues about the Book of Acts are the historical silences. There are these monumental, earth-shattering events of the first century that are just completely missing.
Let's actually apply this deduction. The Book of Acts ends totally abruptly, with Paul just sitting under house arrest in Rome, waiting for his trial. We never hear the outcome. Why? Well, if Acts was written as a legal brief to help Paul, it had to have been sent before the trial ended. On top of that, there is zero mention of Emperor Nero blaming Christians for the burning of Rome and torturing them in AD 64. No mention of Paul's martyrdom around AD 68, and perhaps most incredibly, not a single word about the catastrophic destruction of the Second Temple by Titus in AD 70, an event that completely leveled the Jewish priesthood. Because all of these massive history-altering events are totally absent, we can confidently deduce the book must have been written right before they all kicked off, somewhere around AD 63.
Section 4. History versus command.
Let's pivot now from when this text was written to a really vital philosophical lesson on how to actually read historical documents without making some pretty dangerous mistakes. Whenever you read history, you absolutely must separate the prescriptive from the descriptive.
Prescriptive texts are normative commands, like the Ten Commandments, saying, don't steal. They prescribe what ought to be. But descriptive texts, they simply record what is or what was. When Moses parts the Red Sea, or Jesus walks on water, or Paul survives a poisonous viper bite on Malta, those are unique, one-off historical events. They are describing what happened back then, not prescribing a command for us to go out and try picking up rattlesnakes today.
Dr. Hildebrandt shares this incredibly tragic, real-world story about a brilliant scholar named Hobart Freeman to show exactly why this matters. Freeman fatally bought into the idea that the then equals the now, meaning he believed every single miracle described in Acts should be the absolute norm today. Because of this, when he got a simple scratch on his leg, he refused basic antibiotics. He genuinely believed that relying on a biblical-style healing miracle was a prescriptive mandate over modern medicine. While the scratch got infected, the infection turned into gangrene, and because he stubbornly refused to see a doctor, he died. Misinterpreting descriptive history as a prescriptive command, it's not just an academic slip-up. It can literally be a matter of life and death.
And finally, Section 5, the Road to Pentecost. To wrap things up, let's explore how Acts documents the intentional, geographic expansion of the early church. It's portrayed as the ultimate fulfillment of the ancient Abrahamic covenant to bless all nations. Luke masterfully maps out the arrival of the Holy Spirit in 4 distinct, expanding stages. It starts in Jerusalem with the Jews in chapter 2, then it pushes outward to the Samaritans in chapter 8, it shatters cultural boundaries by reaching the Gentiles, specifically the Roman centurion Cornelius in chapter 10, and finally, it reaches this isolated little pocket of John the Baptist's disciples way over in Ephesus in chapter 19. It's this deliberate, unstoppable outward ripple effect to the ends of the earth.
And this whole incredible ripple effect kicked off at the Harvest Feast of Pentecost. 50 days after Passover, you had Jews from all over the known world, Rome, Egypt, Parthia, all gathered in Jerusalem. Suddenly, the Holy Spirit arrives, and a group of Galileans, people who were widely dismissed by the elites of the day as uneducated country hicks, miraculously start speaking the fluent native languages of all these international visitors. The crowds were just utterly floored to hear their own local, regional dialects spoken perfectly. This undeniable external sign was proof that the message was divine, perfectly fulfilling an ancient prophecy by the prophet Joel that God would pour out his Spirit on all people.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. We've seen how Acts is this brilliant legal defense, a carefully dated historical record, and a literal map of a growing movement. But we also saw the severe danger of misinterpreting its history. If understanding the difference between a simple, descriptive record of what happened and a prescriptive command of what you ought to do is literally a matter of life and death, how might applying this exact framework radically change the way you read every other historical text you encounter from now on? Think about it. Keep seeking the truth and keep learning.